Hey guys, Languagehacker here. For the video today, we got something spicy to talk to you about. I have the spiciest lineups I found from this week of Grandmasters. There's a new format called Trio, where the players had to basically pick a lineup out of 5 predetermined options. And by these options, I mean there are a set of 3 classes, and there were 5 sets there. And each player had to choose one of those 5 sets blindly, so you don't know what other players are picking until everyone has their deck list revealed. But you are limited to very specific class lineups. One of the most popular ones was Warrior. There was Warrior in 4 of those buckets. There were 3 Priests, 2 Mages, and then pretty much one of every other class except for Warlock. So there was a bit of diversity in that sense, and I believe the way it was built was for people to have diversity in lineups. Ultimately, kind of ended up being rock, paper, scissorsy based on the 3 most viable lineups, but we have seen, I think, representation of all 5 possible 3 class lineups. I'm not going to go over all the possible lineups and what people could have brought, but basically a lot of Warrior, a lot of Priest, a couple of Mages, and then 1 Rogue, 1 Paladin, 1 DH, and some other stuff. And based on that, people built lineups in specific ways to either be good against lineups that they thought were popular, or to just have like a kind of good decks lineup. But the way the buckets were built, it was very hard to have just one lineup that had 3 good decks, because there was always like an odd class out in most cases. There was one good lineup, which was Rogue, Mage, Priest, but because that was a good lineup, it was a little more easy to prepare for, because all the other lineups you would choose, you could kind of in your mind say, all right, well, this is going to be a popular lineup, so because of that, I'm going to build my decks a different way. I'm not going to come back from saying that, but cool. Anyways, Trio, new format. I guess they're testing it out in GM this week. Kind of cool. And because of that, we're going to be seeing a lot of diversity in lineups and decks. And that brings me to the topic of today's video. Kind of long and drawn out. Basically, we're going to look over some spicy decks that we saw. A lot of lineups in general here are kind of weird, because it's not stuff we've seen in Masters Tours or like on ladder too much, but I think that's just a side effect of the format. So I'm not going to go over everything. I'll talk about a little bit about some of the decks that we're not used to seeing, that we are going to see here, but that's what we're going to talk about. The 3 spiciest, technically the 4 spiciest decks I found in the lineups. And before we hop in, I'm also going to try a new thing here. This is a super long intro, just bear with me. I want to try and fit in some cool statistical tidbits of info. I'm trying to have some fun with stats, and I want you guys to join me. I talked a bit with some of the HS Replay guys, and they gave me some interesting stats based on some questions I asked them, and I want you guys to try and think of the answers as well. I'm going to include one in this video, see how it does, and then if it goes well, I'll try to include some in future videos as well. So the question I'm going to ask you guys is, what do you think is the highest frequency target of wind chill? What do you think gets frozen the most with wind chill? I'll tell you guys at the end of the video what the answer is, but before we get there, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and make sure to comment in the comment section below what you think the most frequent wind chill target is. And then at the end of the video, you can see if you're correct or not. All right, let's hop right in. Cool. Here we are. Here's the 4 decks I want to talk about. I have included the players' Twitter handles that I want to show you guys. So Xplies, Languagehacker, and Killing All Day. We have 2 Makers GMs here and a European GM. Let's start with Killing All Day. Killing All Day has brought a very interesting list here. You'll notice that there are some Priest cards here that seem pretty normal, and there are some cards here that do not seem normal, and that's because Killing All Day has brought Boar Priest. I'm not sure if I've seen someone play this before, at least in a competitive fashion. I have seen this once or twice on ladder when L1 Boar first came out as a sort of meme. But ever since then, oh god, no. So this is really cool how he kept this under wraps for a while. There are some new cards from the mini set here. Walt Bonker, which will help the deck, I imagine, cycle a bit. Kind of like an Acolyte of Pain, which gets you to the win condition of Boars plus Raised Deads plus Gift of Luminance and Amulet and then dying, with only Boar being the Death Rattle minion that dies. Basically, you make 7 Boars, and then you equip a 15/3 weapon, hit your opponent in the head twice. You get rid of their mana as well. The weapon reduces your opponent's, or reduces? It sets your opponent's mana to 0, basically. So they kind of have to pass, and then they die to 2 swings. So really interesting. Bunch removal, some cycle. Yeah. I have no idea how this is going to go. I don't know what these this matchup spread looks like. I don't know what he's trying to target with this. I'll have to do some testing. Killenday also is, funnily enough, my first opponent. So this will be a deck I have to familiarize myself with. So that's kind of cool. Props to Killenday for bringing this. He's the only boar priest. There are a couple of priests. There was a pretty, I don't want to say even split. There were more miracle. There was a pretty even split between Miracle Priest and Aggro Shadow Priest. And there were a few Kazakhstan priests as well brought this week. Again, it's a function of what lineup they brought in with their 3 classes, so it's hard to do the whole breakdown in a video, but in terms of what archetypes brought, that was the breakdown for Priest. So really interesting here. None of these cards are too wacky outside of the boar. Like, the rest of the deck makes sense, right? Win condition is boar, cycle, survivability. Yeah, interesting. We'll see how that goes. Next up, Languagehacker. Now, I could have highlighted, actually, this entire lineup. Languagehacker brought Warrior, Priest, and I believe Shaman. Bolner TK Shaman. All right, we've seen that before. I think it's the only Bolner Shaman brought this week. And it is also the only big Warrior brought this week. And this is quite a spicy Warrior list. So first of all, already big Warrior is like, wow, we haven't seen big Warrior in forever because it's kind of sketchy. However, in this format, Leandro believed that this would be a good deck to bring based on what he thought other people were bringing. Now, again, I'm not familiar with the matchup spread for this, but how does this deck work? We got some removal cards, we have some card draw, we have Cowardly Grunts and Commencements to pull out big threats, i.e. Troublemaker, Rattlegore, and Colossus, which either lets you just survive an onslaught from aggressive decks or lets you kind of pressure your opponent depending on what decks they're playing. And if that's not good enough, there's a Cthulhu here as well. So, I can imagine this might be some sort of anti-warrior list, perhaps. Big threats that the warrior will have trouble dealing with, a Rattlegore as well, and then Cthulhu. My concern about Cthulhu is I don't know how quickly you cycle through this deck to get to that combo piece, because I imagine Kazakhstan from the other warrior could just pressure you. So I don't know if this is actually worth bringing. Maybe this is like an extra AoE card they wanted, or I'm not sure, because the 4 pieces that Cthulhu has can have utility, but on average it makes your deck bigger, which makes your deck slightly less consistent. So I'm not sure how this is going to pan out, but it's definitely worth highlighting because this is, again, kind of wacky, like the boar priest that Killen brought. Cool. Next up, the priest. Same player, same lineup, Languagehacker. Quest priest. Haven't seen a lot of quest priest. Still kind of wacky as far as things go. But even more so past the fact that it's quest priest, there's some very interesting cards in here. Gangster. There's not that many 2-mana cards you can play to progress the quest. There are some that you can work with, but Gangster is an interesting one because it helps. I actually don't know why this card was never considered. It seems hilarious, but it actually makes a lot of sense because it lets you just develop tempo while progressing quest. It's kind of like pseudo removal. You preemptively try to remove something if you have it on curve. If you have it later, it's a little awkward. It can be played around, but on curve, it actually makes a lot of sense. Deliverance is here as well. I don't think we've seen much of this. It's a removal card that can also generate stuff if it's honorable, if it's an honorable kill. Some of the other stuff is pretty standard after there. Pearl Tusk, I don't think is too common. It's the 5-mana card to progress the quest. It has Rush, it's removal as well. And the top in here is N'Zoth, which is actually kind of cool as well. There's no Zyrella, so there's not that heavy of a win condition. There's also notably no Spirit Guides. Spirit Guides are generally run in this deck to tutor your other spells, right? Your healing, your other removal, shadow spells are also removal. So interestingly, this is not included in the deck. And generally this helps you cycle as well, because once you get to the quest completion, you also need to get the Purified Shard from your deck, and this also can tutor it, because I believe the Purified Shard is a holy spell. So this is, I think, meant to be just an anti-aggro deck with technically win condition against slow decks. I don't expect to see too many slow decks. This could be a way to try to beat Warrior, but I feel like, again, Kazakhstan Warrior might kill you before you get to the Purified Shard, especially when you're not running extra tutor effects. So very spicy. Curious to see how this goes. No Cthulhu in this deck, but Cthulhu in the other deck. This deck's spicy, and even his third deck, the Bolner Shaman did have a couple of tech cards. There was a Revolve in there, which I imagine is a nod to Miracle Priest or Libram Paladin to help against those matchups, but otherwise the Bonus Shaman was pretty standard, so I decided to not highlight that. And finally, this isn't actually as spicy as the other 3 decks, but I think it's still worth noting. Brute DH, Blyze was the only person who brought Demon Hunter who did not bring Quest Fell Demon Hunter. Every single other Demon Hunter was a Quest Fell Demon Hunter, except for Blyze, who just believes in the Brutes. And I thought that was worth noting. This is a new format, and the format is also kind of, how do I word this? It can be diverse across different iterations as well, because the 5 lineups, like the predetermined sets of classes, can change every time the format is used. For example, like I mentioned, we have a lot of warriors and priests in this iteration. However, in future iterations, you can just change the buckets around, right? Change up the classes based on how popular classes are, or how high the win rates are for those classes, which is, I believe, like Hearthstone Esports did this week to some extent. They tried to build it in a way that would allow for diversity, and you can change that in the future. So each iteration will be kind of fresh and new, and prep will have to be done. We'll see spicy lineups, hopefully. Now, to give you a bit of a rundown of everything else we've seen, I can talk about this list a little bit, but it's pretty standard Brute DH, I'd say. 1 Sentinel, there's a Broom, you just kill people with the Brutes, and the Lion's Frenzy. The other sort of lineups had a very, like, a lot of variety. We've seen some Quest Warriors. Because Warrior was so prominent in 4 of the 5 potential lineups, and Control Warrior is the most popular deck right now. The most popular Warrior deck right now, let me rephrase that. It's kind of iffy to bring Control Warrior because it's in so many potential lineups that it's easy to kind of target. So because of that, I think people ended up bringing Quest Warriors, Pirate Warrior, which I don't have highlighted here, but it's just old Pirate Warrior with maybe a couple tech cards. I've seen some Rustrod Vipers and some Mutinous the Devourers, which can help against Control Warrior, which is a matchup people are expecting. I don't think too many people ended up bringing Control Warrior. Some did, but it wasn't overwhelmingly like more than Quest Warrior. I think Quest Warrior was more popular. We saw a pretty wide variety of other stuff. Mozaki Mages, there were some Ping Mages as well that popped up. Mozaki Mage is a deck that could have been targeted this week with some of the lineups. And like I mentioned, one of the good lineups was Rogue Mage Priest, and against that, if people expect a lot of that, they could try bringing aggressive decks that can beat up on Mage. So because of that, we've seen actually some Ping Mages or Mozaki Mage, which still has a good matchup against Control Warrior. We've seen some Weapon Rogues, we've seen some Quest Rogues. What else was there? Almost exclusively Libram Paladin. One idiot brought Buff Paladin. It was me. I brought Buff Paladin. Otherwise, nothing too spicy. Outside of this, of course. These are very spicy. So, be sure to check these players out. I will link the deck codes below. I will link their Twitter handles below as well. If you want to learn more about Trio, I'm going to post the HSC Sports intro video for that. Sottle did a great piece where he explained how the format works, if you guys want to know more about that, because I did a poor job explaining. Yeah, this was really cool. Watch Grandmasters this week. It's going to be really interesting because the lineups are very spicy. I don't know how else to put it. Now, let me give you guys the answer to the question I asked you at the start of the video. I asked you, what do you think is the most common Windchill target? And the most common target, believe it or not, is Kazakhstan. So these stats were pulled from the mini set launch to February 27th. So the second half of February, since the mini set launch after Kazakhstan was printed. Kazakhstan was the target of Windchills 3.2% of the time. Now, this is interestingly not what I actually asked. What I asked was how often are totems windchilled, because in Shaman versus some other matchups, there are a lot of decks that don't actually have a minion-based game plan. So because of that, windchills have to be used more creatively, either on your totems or on minions. So my question to them was, to HS Replay, the analyst, was how many targets are basically the totems. And if you add up all the individual totems, the basic totems, it's 9.4%, which is more than Kazakhstan, but each individual totem was the target less frequently than Kazakhstan. So that's kind of interesting that Kazakhstan is just permanently frozen in a lot of matchups. Did you guys guess correctly? Yes, no? Let me know in the comments. Engagement is good. And actually, just let me know if you think this is a good idea. I have a few more of these that I can use, but I'm going to kind of spread them out over some videos. So if you did like that kind of question and you want more of those kinds of statistics, let me know in the chat. Let me know in the comments, not the chat. Actually, like the chat too. I'm streaming. Yeah. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time.